Hi, this is Colleen from Keeping the Peace Defensive Handgun Training for Women, and today I want to talk briefly about fear of guns, hoplophobia. I have a lot of students come to me who have a background of irrational fear toward guns, and a lot of people in the pro-gun community don't really understand how someone can be terrified of an inanimate object. And being a person who came from a fear of handguns, I just want to explain a little bit about how that happens. There are a variety of situations that can lead to fear of handguns. Sometimes it's just plain ignorance of how the machine works. But a lot of times it's an emotional trauma that the person transfers to an inanimate object because they're incapable of coping with the trauma. And I think that happens a lot more than people realize. In my own past, I grew up with a complete indifference to handguns. We weren't taught about them. They were not a part of our family. There was one in the house, but it just wasn't discussed. So I had just an indifference. I wasn't afraid. I wasn't comfortable. I was indifferent. But when I was 17 years old, my uncle, whom I loved very much, killed himself with a handgun. And at 17, I was incapable of coping with that situation. He was someone I loved very much. I didn't understand suicide at the time. Still don't fully, of course. I also, in my mind, thought, well, you know, it was the gun's fault. If he hadn't had access to that gun, he wouldn't have done it. It wasn't until years later that I realized if it was his wish to end his life, had he not had access to the gun, he would have chosen a different means. But at the time, couldn't process that, so all of my negative emotion toward the situation and toward the loss of my uncle was transferred to the inanimate object, and I became an anti-gunner. I didn't understand why anybody could need a killing machine. Did not have any understanding of someone wanting to use something like that for sporting purposes, for fun. Didn't really yet see the need for self-defense because I was living in the bubble, thinking that nothing bad would ever happen to me still at this point. And really, even after a couple of bad things did happen to me, I still didn't get through this whole process in my mind. It was a completely irrational fear. And I remember if I would walk into a room with a gun, say for instance I came home to visit, and my dad pulled a gun out and brought it in to discuss something with my brother or someone else who was in the room, I would immediately get nauseous. My heart rate would go up, and I would do anything I could to leave the room and get far away from this machine. The same thing rose up in me later when I married my husband. While we were dating, guns never came up. It just wasn't part of our conversation. So when we got married, I moved into his house, and the first time he brought a gun out and started doing things with it, I had that same response. Heart rate went up, got nauseous, felt the need to flee from the room. And of course it was obvious quickly, you know, if the house has got guns in it, you know, I need to get over this. I can't live the rest of my life just bound up in fear like that. In his wisdom, he signed me up for classes, bought me a gun for Christmas the first year we were married. And as soon as I started getting some training and understanding how the machine worked and that there were other purposes for it besides suicide, I started to develop a love for them. I love guns. I love them because of their aesthetics. I love them because it's fun to shoot. I love them because they equalize the playing field between me and someone who's trying to attack me, who's much stronger. I love them because they're a sport that people enjoy. There's really nothing about guns I don't like. Now, there are people that commit evil acts with guns, but it's not the gun that makes them evil. It's the person. And that person had, you know, if they didn't have access to a gun, they would use some other instrument to commit their evil act. That evil act begins in their heart, not with their access to instruments. And I understand that now completely. But there was a process of getting through that. Part of the process was exposure to firearms. Education was the biggest thing. And just understanding, you know, I love this man. Guns are a part of his life. In order for us to work together without me having all these negative emotions, I need to get past this. So I'm really glad that he handled it the way he did. If he had just taken me to the range himself and I had not gone to courses, I don't think I would ever have been as comfortable with them as I am now, because there was still some apprehension. The gun range, the first few times we went, was a terrifying experience. I remember walking in, hearing all the noise, and seeing all these people that I didn't know if they were competent or not, in all these lanes, didn't know what they were doing with their muzzles on the other sides of the partitions, and I myself didn't have any kind of natural muzzle awareness. It had to be trained into me, like it is into everybody else. And, you know, there was a lot of emotion, there was a lot of physical response to that emotion that went into it. So I really understand when someone comes to me and they say, I'm terrified. My husband has these guns. I can't stand having them in the house. And I think the people that are comfortable with guns respond to that person's fear in a way that's not helpful. I hear a lot of pro-gunners use terms like hoplophobe and anti-gunner, and you know, there's all kinds of terms. Yes, there are some people who are anti-gun for no logical reason. There are people that are just plain ignorant. But I think we as pro-gunners, as gun lovers, I love guns, I think we need to be sensitive to the fact that sometimes behind a person's fear, there are layers of hurt and negative experience and emotional trauma that are bound up for them into that object. Those emotions have been transferred to the object, and there needs to be a disconnect between the two. And I think it comes with education about the machine, understanding how it works and how you can be completely in control of it, and understanding that there's a separation between the object and the evil of the person that commits the atrocious act with it. And all of that stuff is a process. It's not going to just happen one day. And when someone is trying to get a person comfortable with a gun, treating them like they're stupid for being fearful is not going to be helpful. It's going to make the problem worse. Causing more negative emotion by yelling at them or calling them out in front of people or shaming them because they don't know how to handle it is going to make the situation worse, because you're piling more and more negative emotion and attaching more and more negative emotion onto the object. So I guess the purpose of my video is to try to help people understand where fears can come from. Mine, my situation, I've got several students who have had the same situation, exactly the same. Maybe they weren't 17, maybe it wasn't an uncle, but it's still the same thing, a suicide with a gun. I know other people who they've been held at gunpoint. I have lots of students who have been held at gunpoint. You would be amazed in a little small town how many people have been held at gunpoint by either a boyfriend, a family member, someone drunk at a party, someone holding them up in a parking lot. I've got lots of those. People that work at hotels have been held up, people that work at gas stations. It just happens all the time. And that's a very negative experience. And I think we need to take that type of thing into consideration and approach it in a gentle, educational, respectful manner when we're trying to educate. So that's something I strive to do with my students. And I think people come to me for that reason, because I've been there. I know what it's like to be scared of a gun. And I know what it's like to get through that process. And when I got through the process, it wasn't nearly as streamlined as it could have been, because other people didn't understand where I was coming from. And I think that's one thing that helps me to teach people that are scared of guns, because I understand right where they're coming from. So if you know somebody in your life who's terrified of guns and you don't understand why, don't let that allow you to judge them or treat them as inferior to yourself. Try to use that as a way to find them help, maybe with someone who does understand. Try to be sensitive, maybe ask questions, get them talking. Be very gentle when you finally do get to the point where you're putting a gun in their hands. Possibly start with trainer guns first before you put real guns. Work with snap caps first so there's no noise. Double plug to help with noise, because all of that stuff is bound up in all this emotion. And if you can talk through maybe the different experiences that they've had, try to draw a separation between the experience and the emotion as opposed to the actual object, the machine. I hope that this is helpful. I've been thinking about doing this video for ages. And I may do this again, maybe in a more thought out way. This is just kind of throwing it together. I'm actually doing this on my phone because I'm not even at home. I'm at the office. But I just thought it was pertinent because I've got a lot of people in my life right now, students, and maybe prospective students too, who are having this experience. And I'm hoping that this will not only help them and encourage them and let them know you're not alone. You're not the only one who feels the way you do. Is it irrational? Yes. But can you understand something's irrational and just make it go away? No, it's a process. You can't just click that off because those emotional and physical responses are out of your control. They have to be worked through. I'm also hoping this will be helpful to people that are trying to mentor and teach someone who's experiencing this fear. If you don't understand it yourself, don't write it off like it's not real, because it is. It can be worked through. You can go from being absolutely, completely petrified, terrified, to being someone who can't wait to go to the range. That's me. In 2006, I was absolutely terrified. Today, I teach people how to shoot for a living, and I love it. I could spend all day, every day at the range with students and be completely happy. So, you know, that transformation came through education and sensitive instructors. And I don't know really how else to say that. If someone had taken me to the range and yelled at me or shamed me or belittled my experience and my past and my emotional troubles with this, it would have probably turned me off even more and made me refuse to even try it. But I was not treated that way. I've been treated very well by the gun community. All of my instructors have handled things extremely well. My husband handled things well, and he's never been someone that's been scared of guns, so he doesn't really understand what I'm experiencing. He'll recognize it, but he doesn't understand it because he hasn't been there. So I hope it's helpful. I'm kind of rambling, I guess, but fear of guns, hoplophobia, it's a real thing. It can happen because of more than one reason. So don't assume that just because someone's scared of guns that they're just a hoplophobic nut. There may be a background there that you need to kind of plug into a little bit before you can understand and before you can help them. This is Colleen signing off from Keeping the Peace. Have a wonderful day and God bless. Bye.